In a striking live television moment, CNN anchor Caitlyn Collins tried to push a misleading story about President Donald Trump. But before her narrative could take hold, Vice President JD Vance intervened with calm precision, uncovering the facts on air. His response left Collins speechless and viewers stunned. The exchange reshaped the national debate on media credibility and political responsibility. The White House press briefing room was more crowded than ever. Lights glared, cameras blinked red, and tension filled the air. All morning, headlines had focused on violent protests in Portland and Chicago. Federal agents injured, ICE vans burned, frightened residents hiding inside their homes. Yet many reporters seemed more interested in political spin than the situation itself. Caitlyn Collins adjusted her microphone, her confident smile suggesting she was ready to challenge. Leaning forward, she spoke louder than anyone else. "Mr. Vice President," she began sharply, "isn't President Trump simply using force for his own gain? Local leaders in Portland insist there's no uprising, just peaceful protests. Isn't this being exaggerated?" The room went silent. Her words sliced through the tension like a knife. Millions were watching live. Outside, protesters shouted in the streets of Washington, their chants echoing through the city. Inside, Collins's framing of events threatened to distort the entire story. For a moment, it felt as though truth itself was being tested. JD Vance, seated at the front, looked up with steady composure. He didn't answer right away. He allowed the pause to stretch, commanding the room's attention. Viewers across the country held their breath. Something important was coming. Collins pressed harder, sensing her moment. She raised a printed statement, quoting Democratic leaders from Portland. "Mayor Wheeler says the city is calm. The police chief says there's no chaos, no violence requiring this level of response. Yet the president sends in the National Guard. Isn't this an abuse of power?" The word abuse rippled through the room. Reporters scribbled notes, cameras zoomed closer. Collins's tone grew bolder with each sentence, daring Vance to respond. But outside the studio walls, reality looked very different. Social media was filled with footage of masked rioters throwing Molotov cocktails at federal buildings, ICE vans vandalized, families trapped in apartments as fireworks exploded outside. In Chicago, agents were ambushed by mobs blocking roads, bullets fired into the air. Federal officers were hospitalized. Yet in that press room, Collins painted a picture of calm. Vance folded his hands, his jaw firm. He recognized this wasn't a question. It was a crafted narrative, and he wouldn't let it stand. He leaned forward, his voice steady and clear. "Caitlyn, I'd urge you as a journalist to visit the scene yourself. It's all documented. It's not political spin, it's reality." Gasps echoed around the room. His tone wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of authority and conviction. "You're quoting partisan officials," he continued, locking eyes with her, "but ignoring the people who actually live there. We've heard from parents, veterans, pastors, all saying their neighborhoods are loud, violent, and unsafe. Their communities are under attack. Do you think they're lying?" Collins shifted uncomfortably as the cameras focused on her face. Her smirk faded. "These aren't peaceful protests," Vance went on. "They're riots. Federal officers are being assaulted, property is being destroyed, and while you downplay it, American families are suffering." The room froze. Reporters paused mid-note. Collins's lips parted, but no words followed. Vance had cut through the narrative, live on national television. For the first time, Caitlyn Collins appeared cornered, and the audience could sense it. She tried to recover, forcing a strained laugh. "Vice President Vance, you can't deny that federal judges blocked these deployments. Local leaders insist this is political theater, Trump flexing power for show." Her words echoed across the room, but this time there was no approving murmur from the press. Too many had seen the raw videos circulating online, fires, destruction, and fear. The reality was undeniable. Vance remained composed, his presence commanding. "Caitlyn," he said evenly, "I wore this country's uniform. I've bled beside men who never came home. To hear you dismiss lawlessness as politics, that's not journalism. It's propaganda." The color drained from her face. This wasn't just a clash of opinions. It was a collision between truth and narrative. The nation watched in silence, realizing something historic was unfolding. Vance didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His authority filled the room. "You claim Portland is calm," he said. "Yet 300 federal agents have been attacked. Families can't sleep through the noise, and property damage has cost taxpayers $50 million. These are facts." He paused, letting the figures settle. Cameras zoomed in on Collins as she braced herself. "You keep quoting politicians," he continued, "but ignore the citizens begging for help, the shop owners who lost everything, the parents who can't walk their children to school. They're Americans too. Don't they deserve protection?" The silence that followed was heavy. Reporters avoided eye contact. For the first time, the focus shifted from Trump and Vance to the media itself, and millions of Americans watching felt it. Collins opened her mouth, then stopped. The cameras caught every flicker of hesitation. The anchor known for quick comebacks had none. Vance leaned in slightly, his tone sharp but composed. "If you believe there's no chaos," he said, "then show the footage tonight. Air the truth. Let people see the fires, the attacks, the fear. You have the platform. Will you use it?" The challenge landed hard. Collins's silence spoke louder than any rebuttal. Across the country, Americans watched, emotional and vindicated. They had seen their cities burn while networks downplayed the violence. Now, someone in power was saying what they felt. Social media erupted instantly, clips of the exchange spreading across every platform. Hashtags surged, "Truth overspin, Vance exposes CNN." Inside the press room, even reporters sat quietly. Some looked at Collins with discomfort, others at Vance with a hint of respect. The silence was unforgettable. In that moment, the narrative shifted. JD Vance wasn't just answering a question. He was redefining the discussion. The briefing room had become a battleground of truth. Collins shuffled her notes, her confidence fading. "Vice President Vance," she stammered, "federal judges in Oregon already said—" Vance interrupted gently but firmly. "Judges can issue rulings, Caitlyn, but they can't erase reality. Portland isn't calm. Chicago isn't calm. Our agents are bleeding." The impact of his words was electric. Reporters stared, stunned. Televisions across the nation played the moment. Airports, restaurants, homes. People stopped to listen. For many Americans who'd felt ignored, business owners, families, veterans, it was a rare moment of recognition. Some whispered, "Finally." Collins tried to smile again, but her voice shook. She was no longer debating. She was being exposed, and every second was live. Vance adjusted his microphone, his gaze steady. "You quote politicians," he said, "but I've spoken with the people living there. They told me it feels like war. Their children can't sleep. They pray nightly for help because their leaders abandoned them. Do you call that peace?" The silence that followed was heavy and unrelenting. Collins looked down, avoiding his eyes. The confidence she once wore like armor cracked piece by piece on live television. Another reporter shifted uncomfortably behind her. The usual rhythm of the briefing was gone. Viewers across the nation sat glued to their screens, parents thinking of their children, veterans remembering battlefields, ordinary citizens feeling, for once, that someone was standing up for them. Collins tried one last time, her voice barely steady. "But Mr. Vice President, sources say these are isolated events." Vance cut her off cleanly. "Isolated?" His tone sharpened. "Over 1,200 arrests, 300 assaults on federal officers, 50 million in damage. That's not isolated. That's anarchy." The words landed like a final strike. Collins froze, her face pale under the lights. The room stayed silent, the cameras unblinking. The cameras caught every movement, each blink, each uneasy breath. The room itself seemed to exhale as reporters leaned back, stunned into silence. Vance didn't pause. "You have prime-time access, Caitlyn," he said firmly. "You could show America the truth. But instead you filter it, twist it, and downplay it. That isn't journalism, it's betrayal." The impact was immediate. It was the statement millions had waited to hear someone finally say. Across the country, living rooms, cafes, and bars erupted with applause as if the viewers were sitting there themselves. On social media, the clip exploded. JD Vance versus fake news dominated trending lists. For the first time in her career, Caitlyn Collins sat wordless, live, in front of a nation that wouldn't forget what it had just seen. The exchange echoed far beyond the White House briefing room. Televisions replayed the moment nonstop. In a small diner in Ohio, truck drivers watched silently over steaming mugs of coffee. One muttered, "Finally, someone said it." In Portland, a shop owner who had watched her business burn held her phone, tears on her face. "He's speaking for us," she whispered. "He's telling the truth no one else will." Twitter, Facebook, and X lit up with hashtags, Vance exposes CNN, truth over spin, fake news Caitlyn. Millions who had long felt ignored by the media finally felt heard. Inside newsrooms from New York to Los Angeles, producers whispered in disbelief. "Did she just get crushed live on air?" one asked quietly. Back in the briefing room, Collins's silence dragged on. Her once confident expression flickered with unease. The balance of power had shifted. Viewers no longer saw a controlled anchor. They saw someone stripped of certainty, confronted by undeniable truth. Upstairs in the White House residence, President Donald Trump sat before a large screen, arms crossed, watching closely. When Vance delivered the word betrayal, Trump smiled. "That's my guy," he said proudly. "Sharp, calm, unstoppable." His aides exchanged quick looks. They knew this wasn't just a tense exchange, it was a defining moment. Americans were seeing JD Vance not merely as Trump's running mate, but as a force in his own right. Phones across the West Wing buzzed. Governors, senators, and allies texted in rapid succession. "Vance is dominating. This is going viral. He just ended CNN on air." Even Trump's critics watching from afar could sense the shift. What had started as another press confrontation had turned into a national reckoning over truth and bias. Trump leaned back, satisfied. "Let them play that clip 1,000,000 times," he said quietly. "The American people will finally see what we're fighting for." For the first time that day, amid protests and lawsuits, the president looked at ease, watching his vice president calmly dismantle misinformation. At the podium, Caitlyn Collins gripped her pen until her knuckles whitened. She tried to speak, but the words refused to come. The silence stretched unbearably long. Cameras zoomed in, capturing her rapid blinking and trembling lips. This was no longer a debate. It was a collapse. Yet Vance didn't gloat. He didn't smile or raise his voice. He waited, steady and composed, his calmness stronger than any argument. When Collins finally managed to speak, her voice cracked. "Well, Mr. Vice President, we just report what officials say." Her uncertainty was unmistakable. For the first time, the confident anchor sounded vulnerable. Vance's reply was quiet but firm. "Then maybe, Caitlyn, it's time you stop echoing officials and start speaking for the people." The words cut deeper than any accusation. In homes across the nation, ordinary citizens clapped, some through tears. They felt seen, defended, and vindicated. The briefing room was no longer just a press event. It had become a reckoning. Reporters who once scribbled notes now sat frozen. Some avoided eye contact, others glanced at Collins uneasily. CNN's top anchor, normally quick with comebacks, seemed visibly shaken. Her silence stretched until the truth itself felt heavy in the air. JD Vance had seized control, and there was no spin strong enough to take it back. A journalist from another outlet whispered, "She's finished." His colleague nodded slightly but said nothing. The tension was suffocating. Vance didn't waver. He held steady, his tone composed but unyielding. He wasn't attacking. He was standing firm for honesty. The audience at home felt chills. Some whispered, "That's leadership." Others murmured, "That's courage." This was no longer just Caitlyn versus Vance. It was the entire press establishment being held to account. Live before the nation. In living rooms across America, the clip replayed again and again. Families who had felt ignored finally saw their frustrations voiced on national television. In Portland, a grandmother who had pleaded for city leaders to stop the nightly violence clutched her rosary, whispering, "Thank God someone told the truth." In Chicago, a young mother who had shielded her children from gunfire wept. "He's fighting for us," she said softly as her kids hugged her. At a veterans hall in Pennsylvania, retired Marines stood before the TV, eyes glassy. One saluted the screen. "That man," he said quietly, "remembers his oath." This wasn't politics anymore. It was personal. For millions, Vance's calm dismantling of false narratives resonated deeply. The emotion wasn't just outrage, it was release. For once, someone in power wasn't dismissing them. He was speaking for them. At the podium, Collins fidgeted with her notes, searching for a line of recovery. Her hand trembled. The cameras caught everything. Her darting eyes, the flush rising on her neck, the nervous swallow. The anchor known for cornering politicians now found herself cornered. Vance leaned forward slightly, voice low but unwavering. "You came here with talking points, Caitlyn. I came with facts, and America can see the difference." The line landed with precision. The room was so silent, the hum of the equipment seemed deafening. Collins tried to interject, her words stumbling. We just report." Vance lifted a hand gently, not to silence her, but to close the discussion. "Then report the truth," he said. "Show people what's really happening." The audience at home erupted, not in laughter, but in emotion. Some applauded, others shouted, "Yes!" at their screens. In that moment, Vance wasn't merely confronting a journalist. He was confronting an entire system. As the briefing rolled live across the nation, the mood in cities shifted. In Portland and Chicago, crowds gathered around outdoor TVs, watching the exchange. Some booed, some shouted, but others fell quiet. One young man lowered his mask and said, "He's right, it's chaos. My neighbors are scared." His friends glared, but his words lingered. Families huddled in apartments texted each other links to the clip. "He said it," one father wrote. "We're not crazy." In Chicago, off-duty police officers crowded a break room, nodding silently as the video replayed. "Finally," one whispered, "someone's got our back." It was no longer a TV segment. It was a spark. The beginning of a national reckoning. Inside CNN headquarters, panic spread. Producers barked into headsets, scrambling to manage the damage. "Cut away!" one executive shouted. "Change the feed. Don't let this clip dominate." But it was too late. The footage was everywhere, unstoppable. Screens glowed with Vance's calm face, the moment now impossible to edit out. Interns whispered, "She froze. She couldn't answer." Others shook their heads, realizing what had just happened. It wasn't only a blow to Caitlyn Collins. It was a hit to the network's credibility. At Fox News, the control room was energized. Producers prepped the replay, calling it the takedown of the year. Independent platforms on X and Rumble had already posted clips with captions like "Vance exposes fake news" and "The moment everything changed." For the first time in years, the conversation had shifted. Not about the story CNN pushed, but the story CNN couldn't control. Back at the podium, JD Vance's voice softened again, carrying both firmness and empathy. "My fellow Americans," he began, turning from Collins to face the cameras, "I swore an oath to defend this nation, not only from enemies abroad, but from the lies that eat away at trust here at home." His words struck directly at the nation's core. "I fought in Iraq. I've seen what real war looks like. What's happening in Portland and Chicago, those aren't peaceful protests. That's destruction. And it's not fair to the mothers, the shopkeepers, the children simply begging for safety." Across the country, countless viewers were moved to tears. In Portland, a single father held his daughter closer as Vance spoke. In Texas, a veteran stood at attention before his TV. Caitlyn Collins looked down, unable to meet his eyes. The room no longer belonged to her. It now belonged to the people whose struggles Vance was channeling. Across America, millions whispered the same words. He understands us. The clip of JD Vance confronting Caitlyn Collins spread like wildfire. Within minutes, it was everywhere, on X, TikTok, and Facebook feeds from small towns to big cities. In Iowa, a farmer wiped the sweat from his brow, checked his phone, and saw the vice president standing tall on screen. He leaned back, murmuring, "That man's fighting for us." In Portland, side-by-side videos played. Burning dumpsters and shattered windows contrasted with Vance's steady voice, urging Collins to show the truth. The impact was visceral, cutting deep into the national conscience. At CNN headquarters, staff groaned as fake news Caitlyn climbed to the top of global trends. "We can't contain it," one producer admitted. "She's getting torn apart online." Even neutral viewers who tuned in casually found themselves sharing the clip, stunned by her silence. By the hour's end, the numbers were staggering: millions of views, tens of thousands of comments, and endless shares. The people had spoken. It was no longer just a viral clip. It was a national reckoning. Inside the West Wing, President Trump scrolled through his phone and posted on Truth Social. His words flashed across millions of screens. Vice President JD Vance destroys fake news, CNN live on air. Calm, strong, truthful. America is proud tonight. MAGA. Within moments, Trump's post was being shared everywhere, adding even more momentum. Reporters rushed to keep up, but the narrative had already shifted. In conservative homes, cheers erupted. Patriotic songs blared from radios as callers flooded talk shows, praising Vance. In liberal circles, silence filled the air, Collins's misstep too glaring to defend. Inside the White House, aides watched the explosion online with awe. "Mr. President," one whispered, "this might be the biggest viral moment of the year." Trump nodded, pleased. "The people don't want spin," he said. "They want honesty, and JD just gave it to them." For the first time that day, Trump appeared at ease. Amid protests, lawsuits, and unrest, his vice president had shifted the tide through calm conviction and undeniable truth. Back at the podium, Caitlyn Collins's composure cracked. Her shoulders slumped. Her confident tone trembled. She tried to pivot. "Well, CNN will continue to provide balanced coverage," she said, but the words rang hollow. Reporters shifted uncomfortably. Some couldn't meet her eyes. The damage was done, and she knew it. Vance didn't gloat. He simply held her gaze, calm and unflinching, as if to say, "This is what accountability looks like." The cameras caught her forced smile, the nervous shuffle of papers, the pen clicking in her shaking hand. Viewers at home saw not professionalism, but panic. Clips of her stumble were replayed, slowed down, turned into memes across the internet. The once confident anchor who prided herself on exposing others was now the one exposed. For Caitlyn Collins, the fall was swift and public. For JD Vance, it marked his rise, not just as Trump's partner, but as a man who spoke truth when America needed it most. As Collins's collapse dominated headlines, new voices began to emerge. Families of federal agents stepped forward. In Portland, the wife of an injured agent held up her husband's torn, blood-stained uniform on a local news broadcast. "My husband was hit with a brick protecting a courthouse," she said, her voice trembling. "And Caitlyn calls that peaceful? That's not peace. That's war." Thank God Vice President Vance told the truth. Her emotional words spread rapidly across the country, replayed on conservative networks and shared by thousands online. Clips of grieving mothers and wounded officers appeared alongside Vance's calm statements, creating an emotional wave impossible to ignore. For many Americans, the message hit home. Behind the shouting and spin, real families were paying the price. And Vance's quiet confrontation wasn't just politics, it was a defense of dignity. JD spoke for us, one federal agent texted from a hospital bed in Portland. Finally, someone told the truth. Inside CNN's headquarters, the fallout was brutal. Executives huddled in panic. Ratings analysts slid grim charts across the table. Viewers were tuning out by the thousands. Producers whispered about mutiny. Some demanded Collins be taken off air to stop the damage. Others tried to defend her, but even they looked uneasy as her credibility crumbled in real time. In the control room, Vance's voice replayed over and over. "I encourage you to go on the ground and see for yourself." Each repetition hit like a hammer, reminding everyone how thoroughly Collins had been outmatched. Meanwhile, rival networks capitalized. Fox News aired the exchange nonstop. Independent commentators on YouTube and Rumble dissected every second, their titles blaring, "JD Vance obliterates CNN bias." For years, CNN had been accused of twisting the truth. But tonight, under the studio lights, it wasn't Trump shouting or a partisan rant. It was JD Vance, calm, factual, unshaken. And in doing so, he turned one of the network's strongest anchors into a symbol of everything Americans distrusted about mainstream media. By evening, the nation wasn't just watching, it was feeling. In diners across small towns, people gathered around muted TVs, reading subtitles as JD Vance dismantled the narrative. Truck stops buzzed with chatter. "That man's the real deal," a driver said, shaking his head. On social media, mothers and veterans poured out emotional posts. I cried hearing Vance speak. He sounded like he was protecting my family. Even independents who rarely trusted politicians found themselves moved. JD Vance hadn't just won an argument, he'd struck a nerve. He'd spoken for millions who felt unheard, reminding them that truth still had a voice in America. He wasn't angry. He wasn't cruel. One teacher from Ohio wrote online, "He was just speaking the truth, and the truth hurt because it revealed the lies we've been told for years." Emotional clips began circulating. Patriotic music set against footage of Vance's words and images of federal agents standing guard in Portland. The country felt a mix of sorrow for the unrest and pride in the courage to confront it. For millions, the moment went beyond politics. It became about trust, honesty, and respect for those long ignored. That night, JD Vance became more than Trump's running mate. He became a voice for America's wounded spirit. By evening, rallies formed across the nation, spontaneous, unplanned, and deeply emotional. From Ohio to Texas, Americans gathered, waving flags and holding signs reading, "Truth over lies," and "We stand with Vance." In Cincinnati, a mother of 3 stood on the courthouse steps, tears in her eyes. Her oldest son was stationed in Portland, defending federal buildings under attack. "My son risks his life while Caitlyn Collins calls it peaceful," she shouted. JD Vance gave us the voice we never had. The crowd answered with powerful chants of, "USA, USA!" Observers were stunned, not by the size of these gatherings, but by how quickly they formed. No political group had organized them. People simply came. Neighbors texted neighbors. Families drove miles. Veterans stood tall, flags in hand. The videos flooding social media showed a country moved by something deeper than party loyalty. Vance's words struck a nerve, about dignity, about truth, about defending those who defend the nation. For the first time in years, many felt someone in Washington finally had the courage to stand up to the media and fight for them. As night fell, Caitlyn Collins left the studio. Her usual confidence was gone. Sitting in the back of a black SUV, she stared at the city lights, her phone buzzing nonstop with alerts she couldn't bear to open. Every headline spoke of her defeat. Every clip replayed her silence, her smirk fading, her voice cracking. The driver glanced back. Her eyes were red. For the first time in her career, she wasn't being praised for asking tough questions. She had become the story. In her hands, she gripped a wrinkled piece of paper, the talking points her aides had given her. The same ones meant to undermine Trump. Now they felt useless. Outside, the streets echoed with car horns and chants in support of JD Vance. Collins sank deeper into her seat. It was a quiet, lonely ride home, and she knew deep down this wasn't just a bad night. It was a turning point she might never overcome. While rallies grew across the nation, JD Vance appeared again on live television, this time outside the White House. Cameras surrounded him. Microphones closed, but his voice was calm. "My fellow Americans," he began, "this isn't about me or a reporter. It's about truth versus lies. Families of federal agents deserve honesty. Communities deserve peace. And America deserves leaders who won't bow to propaganda." His tone grew stronger. This nation was built on sacrifice. Marines who fought, police who bled, families who prayed. To call their pain entertainment for political gain is not journalism. It's betrayal. And tonight that betrayal was revealed. The crowd outside wept. Veterans saluted. Parents held their children close. Across living rooms nationwide, people felt chills. His line, "This is about truth versus lies," lit up social media, headlines, and rally banners. It wasn't just a quote anymore. It was a defining message. Families watched in silence. Parents wiped away tears as Vance's steady voice echoed. Truth versus lies, that's the battle before us. In Portland, a shop owner replayed the moment. His store windows shattered from riots, his teenage daughter still traumatized. He whispered, "Finally, someone said it." On the East Coast, a retired Marine sat still, fists tight, eyes wet. "That man's one of us," he said. "He knows what we've sacrificed." Even those who didn't support Trump admitted, this moment wasn't about party lines anymore. It was about honesty. Collins's smirk and silence stood in stark contrast to Vance's composure, and with each replay, Americans saw who truly cared. For once, the nation wasn't divided by red or blue. It was united by truth, dignity, and courage. Inside CNN headquarters, panic took over. Producers scrambled. Executives barked orders. Emails flooded. But nothing stopped the growing outrage. Clips of Collins's stumble flooded every platform, edited, memed, and replayed beside real footage from the riots she'd downplayed. One phrase dominated the internet. Truth over lies. Even independent journalists who often criticized Trump admitted Vance was right. "We can disagree on politics," one wrote, "but calling chaos peaceful is dishonest." Tonight, JD Vance reminded us what accountability looks like. Meanwhile, Collins sat alone in her office, staring at the floor. The buzz of voices around her faded. She replayed the exchange again and again, every second burning into her mind. She had tried to undermine a president and ended up undermining herself. By then, JD Vance's name was everywhere, trending headlines, talk shows, podcasts. Not just as vice president, but as the man who stood up to the biggest media machine in America and won. Night fell over Washington, but the country was wide awake. JD Vance stepped out of the West Wing, stopping at the gates to greet a small crowd holding candles and flags. His closing words were simple, but unforgettable. "My fellow Americans, remember this night. Remember, truth has no party. When lies are exposed, freedom wins. Stay strong, pray for our country, and never let anyone silence your voice." The crowd erupted, chanting, "USA! USA!" as tears streamed down their faces. Across America, families felt the same chill. Something historic had just taken place. Not on a battlefield, but in a studio. A single exchange had changed how people viewed the media, truth, and leadership. And to you, watching this story unfold, if this moment touched your heart, hit that like button, subscribe to Storytime with Green, and share your thoughts below. Your words matter. Join our membership to access behind-the-scenes features and support more stories that move, unite, and remind America to stand proud once again.